Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight we travel across centuries, across battlefields and marble forums, across rivers and deserts, across the rise and the quiet fading of one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. This is the story of Rome. Not just the Rome of emperors and legions, but the Rome of farmers and philosophers, of senators and slaves, of ambition and endurance. From a small settlement beside the Tiber River, to an empire stretching from Britain to Egypt, to the golden domes of Constantinople, for over 2,000 years Rome shaped the world. It built roads that still guide us. It wrote laws that still influence us. It created stories that still echo through our languages and cities. But tonight we won't rush through conquest. We won't shout through battles. Instead, we'll move slowly. We'll walk through candlelit streets. We'll stand beneath towering columns. We'll listen to the quiet turning of history. So wherever you are in the world, take a slow breath, get comfortable. And before we begin, I'd love to know, what time is it where you're listening? And what part of the world are you watching from? History connects us across centuries. Tonight, it connects us across continents. Now, let the noise of today drift away. The year is 753 BCE. A river flows quietly through central Italy, and two brothers stand at the edge of destiny. Let's begin. Crescent Moon. Chapter 1: The River, the Wolf, and the First Wall. Good evening. Before there were emperors crowned in gold, before legions marched in perfect formation, before marble temples gleamed beneath the Mediterranean sun, there was only a river. The Tiber River moved slowly through central Italy, winding its way between soft hills and low marshlands. In the early mornings, mist hovered above its surface, drifting like breath across still water. The land was quiet then. No forums, no triumphal arches, no echo of iron-shod boots, only reeds brushing against the current, only birds lifting from fig trees at dawn. It is here, in this quiet landscape beneath the future Palatine Hill, that Rome begins, not in certainty, but in story. The story tells of a young woman named Rhea Silvia. She was sworn to a life of sacred devotion, forbidden from marriage, forbidden from children. Her uncle, a king who feared rivals, had ensured it, but legend rarely bends to fear. The god Mars, so the tale says, came to her in silence. And from that meeting twin boys were born, Romulus, Remus. To the king they were not infants, they were threats, and so, like many fragile hopes in history, they were ordered to disappear. Placed in a woven basket, the twins were carried to the banks of the Tiber. The river was swollen with spring rain, its waters slow but restless. The basket was set adrift, not violently, but with the quiet cruelty of someone who believes fate will do the rest. But fate has its own currents. The river did not swallow them. Instead, it carried them gently to the shallows, where roots of a wild fig tree gripped the muddy earth. The basket caught there, rocking softly in the reeds. And then, the most famous image in Roman memory. A wolf emerged from the trees. Not a beast of terror, but a creature of instinct. A mother without cubs of her own. She approached the sound of crying and found the twins beneath the open sky. Instead of teeth, she offered warmth. Instead of death, she offered milk. Beneath the shelter of the hill, in a shallow den of earth and shadow, the boys survived. The wolf would become a symbol, not merely of rescue, but of Rome itself. Fierce, protective, untamed. A city born not from comfort, but from endurance. Eventually, a shepherd named Faustulus discovered the children. He and his wife raised them among flocks and open fields. The twins grew strong beneath the Italian sun, learning the rhythms of rural life, tending animals, climbing hills, wrestling in dust and wind. They did not grow as princes. They grew as boys of the land. And yet something in them was restless. When they learned the truth of their birth, of betrayal and stolen inheritance, they returned to confront the past. Their uncle was overthrown, their lineage restored, but instead of remaining in safety, they chose to return to the riverbank where their story had begun. There, beside the Tiber, between 7 gentle hills, they made a decision that would echo for centuries. They would build a city. But even at the beginning, Rome was not born in harmony. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill, defensible, elevated, commanding. Remus preferred the nearby Aventine. They sought signs from the sky. Birds circled overhead. Each brother claimed the better omen. Pride met pride, and pride rarely yields. In the end, the argument dissolved into violence. The stories differ in detail, whether Romulus struck the fatal blow himself, or whether one of his followers acted in anger. What remains constant is this: Remus fell. The soil that would become Rome absorbed its first blood. Romulus stood alone. He drew a boundary in the earth, a sacred line called the Pomerium, marking where the walls of his city would rise. No one, he declared, could cross it without permission. The boundary was not just physical. It was symbolic. Rome would be defended, even against kin. Tradition assigns a date to this moment: April 21st, 753 BCE. Whether exact or imagined, the meaning mattered more than the precision. Rome believed it had a birthday, a beginning shaped by destiny. Under Romulus, the settlement began as little more than clustered huts of wood and thatch. Smoke drifted upward from cooking fires. Paths formed between dwellings. The first crude walls were raised from earth and timber. But Rome had a problem. It had men, few women, and so another harsh chapter unfolded. Romulus invited neighboring tribes to a festival. During the celebration, Roman men seized the daughters of the Sabines and carried them away. The act was violent. It was strategic. It was formative. War followed. Yet, in the midst of conflict, the abducted women intervened. They stood between fathers and husbands, pleading for peace. Their presence forced compromise. The Sabines and Romans merged, forming one community. Rome's earliest expansion came not only through conquest, but through absorption. This pattern would define it forever. The early city was rough, uncertain, experimental. Its people were shepherds, wanderers, outcasts, opportunists. Romulus reportedly offered asylum to fugitives and displaced men from surrounding regions. Rome was not exclusive. It was open, aggressively so. A place where identity could be remade. And that may be the most powerful origin of all. Because Rome was not built by purity of blood or ancient lineage alone. It was built by ambition, by those willing to step into something new. The wolf, the river, the fallen brother, whether myth or memory, became the foundation of Roman psychology. Strength through struggle, unity through conflict, expansion through absorption. The huts on the hillside would one day become marble palaces. The dirt paths would become roads stretching across continents. The shepherd's boundary line would become imperial frontiers. But in this first chapter, there is no empire yet. Only a river moving through mist. Only a wolf watching from shadow. Only a small cluster of huts beneath the hills. And a city that does not yet know what it will become. Breathe slowly. The Tiber still flows. The hills still rise. And Rome, though not yet mighty, has taken its first breath. Rest now. The kings will come next. Crescent Moon. Chapter 2: The Kings Who Shaped a City. When the first wall was drawn in earth beneath the Palatine Hill, Rome was still fragile. Its huts were wooden. The streets were dirt. Its future uncertain. Romulus, warrior and founder, ruled as its first king. But when he vanished, whether taken by storm, legend, or quiet assassination, the city did not collapse. Instead, it chose another ruler. And so began the Age of Kings. For more than 2 centuries, Rome would be guided not by emperors, not by senators alone, but by monarchs whose authority blended ritual, warfare, and law. Unlike the absolute kings of later empires, these early rulers were shaped by negotiation. The Senate, a council of elders, advised them. The people gathered in assemblies. Authority was real but not limitless. The second king, according to tradition, was Numa Pompilius. If Romulus had built Rome's walls, Numa built its soul. He was remembered not as a conqueror, but as a man of peace and ritual. Under his reign, temples rose beside simple homes. Sacred fires were tended. Priests were appointed to oversee sacrifices and ceremonies. Time itself was reshaped. The Roman calendar was adjusted, structured into months and holy days. Festivals were organized not just for celebration, but for unity. Through ritual, the scattered people of Rome began to see themselves as one community. Religion was not separate from politics. It was politics. The gods watched over every decision, war declarations, harvests, treaties. To displease them was to invite disaster. And so Rome learned early that order required more than weapons. It required belief. After Numa came rulers less peaceful. Tullus Hostilius rejected calm and turned Rome outward. Under his command, the rival city of Alba Longa was destroyed. Its people were not annihilated, but relocated. Their nobles were absorbed into Roman ranks. This pattern, conquer, absorb, expand, was becoming familiar. Rome did not merely erase its enemies, consumed them. The fourth king, Ancus Marcius, strengthened the city physically. Bridges were built across the Tiber River. Trade increased. A small port formed near the river's mouth. Rome was no longer only a hilltop village. It was becoming a center of movement. But the most dramatic changes arrived with the influence of the Etruscans, a powerful civilization to the north. Their kings, it is said, ruled the final generations of Rome's monarchy. Under Tarquinius Priscus, grand construction began. The foundations of the Circus Maximus were laid, a massive arena where chariot races would one day thunder before roaring crowds. Drainage systems were engineered to dry marshland, including the Great Cloaca Maxima, one of the earliest large-scale sewer systems in history. Stone replaced mud. Architecture replaced improvisation. Then came Servius Tullius, perhaps the most reform-minded of them all. He reorganized Roman society according to wealth and military obligation. A census was introduced, counting citizens and assigning them roles in defense. The Servian Wall, a fortification around the growing city, was constructed or expanded during this era. Rome was learning to measure itself, to categorize its people, to prepare for conflict before it arrived. But reform rarely protects against ambition. The final king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, ruled differently. He did not consult the Senate as openly. He relied on force more than persuasion. His projects were monumental, including the completion of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus atop the Capitoline Hill, but his methods were harsh. He demanded obedience. And Rome, shaped by centuries of shared governance and ritual balance, began to resist. The breaking point did not come through foreign invasion. It came through scandal. According to tradition, Tarquin's son assaulted a noblewoman named Lucretia. Shamed and devastated, she revealed the crime publicly before taking her own life. Her death ignited outrage among Rome's elite families. One man, Lucius Junius Brutus, stepped forward. He did not call merely for punishment. He called for revolution. The people rose. Tarquin and his family were expelled from the city in 509 BCE. And in that moment, something profound shifted. Rome did not simply remove a king. It rejected kingship itself. The word rex, king, would become poisonous in Roman politics. For centuries afterward, any leader suspected of desiring monarchy would face suspicion or violence. The monarchy had shaped Rome. It had given it walls, temples, roads, rituals, law. But it had also taught Rome what unchecked power could become. And so the crown was set aside. In its place, a new experiment began. One that would attempt to balance authority between offices, councils, and citizens. The Republic was born not in idealism, but in caution. Rome had learned through experience that power concentrated too tightly invites collapse. As the kings faded into memory, the city stood stronger than before. Its population had grown. Its institutions had matured. Its identity had sharpened. No longer merely a settlement of shepherds. No longer a city guided by divine legend alone. Rome was becoming political, structured, intentional. The hills still rose above the river. Smoke still drifted from hearths. But beneath the daily rhythm of market and prayer, a new idea was forming. Power would no longer rest in one pair of hands. It would be divided, shared, watched. At least, that was the plan. Rest now. The kings are gone. The Republic waits. Crescent Moon. Chapter 3 The Republic Power Shared, Power Contested. When the last king was driven from Rome, the city did not celebrate wildly. It breathed, carefully, cautiously. The Romans had removed a tyrant, but they had also removed certainty. A king, for all his dangers, had been a single voice of command. Now power would be divided. And division, though safer, is rarely simple. The new system was called a residential publica, a public matter. A republic. Instead of one ruler, there would be 2 consuls elected each year. Each consul held equal authority. Each could veto the other. Their power was immense. They commanded armies, presided over the Senate, and enforced law, but it was temporary. 1 year. Then it passed to others. The Senate remained, composed of Rome's elder statesmen. They did not pass laws directly, but they guided policy, controlled finances, and advised magistrates. In truth, their influence was vast. But Rome was not a democracy as we understand it today. It was layered, complex, and deeply unequal. Society was divided between 2 main groups, the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians were the old aristocratic families, wealthy landowners who traced their lineage back to the earliest days of the city. They filled the Senate and dominated the highest offices. The plebeians were everyone else. Farmers, artisans, traders, soldiers. They made up the majority of Rome's population, and they carried its burdens. In the early republic, plebeians had little political power. They could not hold high office. They had limited legal protections. Many were trapped in debt, vulnerable to exploitation by wealthy creditors. And yet Rome depended on them, because Rome was constantly at war. Every male citizen was expected to serve in the army. When enemies threatened the city, it was the plebeians who stood in formation, shield to shield, beneath the open sky. They fought, they bled, they died. And when they returned home, many found their farms neglected, their debts multiplied, their voices unheard. Tension simmered. Then, in 494 BCE, something extraordinary happened. The plebeians left. They gathered their families and withdrew from the city, climbing a nearby hill outside Rome's walls. They refused to return unless their rights were recognized. It was not violent. It was deliberate. Without the plebeians, Rome had no army, no labor force, no stability. The patricians were forced to negotiate. From this crisis emerged a new office, the tribune of the plebs. Tribunes were elected representatives of the plebeians. They held the power to veto actions of the consuls or senate that harmed the common people. Most importantly, they were considered sacrosanct, physically protected by law. To harm a tribune was a crime against the state. For the first time, the lower classes had institutional protection. But the struggle did not end there. The laws of Rome at this time were not written. They were passed down orally, interpreted by patrician magistrates. Justice depended on memory, and memory could be manipulated. So the plebeians demanded transparency. Around 450 BCE, Rome inscribed its laws onto bronze tablets and displayed them publicly in the Forum. These became known as the 12 Tables. They were not perfect. They were often harsh. But they were visible. And visibility meant accountability. Rome was learning that stability required compromise. Yet even as internal balance improved, danger pressed from beyond the walls. In 390 BCE, a Gallic army from the north descended upon the city. At the Battle of the Allia River, Roman forces were overwhelmed. Panic spread. The survivors fled back toward the hills. The Gauls entered Rome. Much of the city was looted and burned. According to legend, sacred geese in a temple alerted defenders during a night assault on the Capitoline Hill. Whether myth or fact, the trauma was real. Rome had been humiliated. For a civilization that believed itself favored by destiny, the sack was a wound to the spirit. But Rome did not dissolve. It rebuilt. Stronger walls were constructed. Military discipline was refined. The army's formation evolved into a more flexible structure. one better suited to varied terrain. The Republic absorbed the lesson. Defeat was not the end. It was instruction. Through the 4th century BCE, Rome slowly expanded its influence across central Italy. It formed alliances with neighboring communities, binding them with treaties that demanded loyalty but offered varying degrees of citizenship. Rome's strength was no longer just military. It was political engineering. Rather than destroy conquered peoples outright, Rome often integrated them. Some communities received full citizenship, others partial rights. Many were required to supply troops. This network of alliances created depth. If Rome lost one battle, it could call upon reserves from dozens of allied towns. The Republic, though internally divided, was externally cohesive. But beneath the surface, inequality persisted. The patricians still held most power. The Senate still shaped policy. The assemblies, though inclusive in theory, were weighted toward wealthier citizens. And yet, Rome continued forward. Not because it was perfect, but because it adapted. The Republic was not born fully formed. It evolved through argument, through protest, through the constant push and pull between classes. Every office, every reform, every compromise carried the imprint of tension. But tension, when balanced, creates strength. As the sun set over the Tiber each evening, farmers returned from fields, senators from debate, soldiers from training grounds. The city buzzed with conversation, markets trading grain and olives, children reciting lessons, magistrates preparing speeches. Rome was no longer a village of huts. It was a living political experiment, a city determined never again to bow to a king. Yet history moves quietly, and even systems designed to prevent tyranny can, over time, create new concentrations of power. The Republic had survived kings. It had survived invasion. It had survived internal division. Now it stood poised at the edge of something greater. Italy itself lay before it, divided among rival peoples and proud tribes. Rome would not remain contained. The hills were too small, the ambition too large. Rest now. The Republic is awake, and soon it will march. Crescent Moon. Chapter 4: The Long Conquest of Italy. After surviving kings and rebuilding from fire, the Roman Republic stood restless beneath its 7 hills. The city was no longer fragile. It had walls. It had laws. It had an army disciplined by defeat and strengthened by reform. But Rome was not alone on the Italian peninsula. To the north lived the Etruscans. In the mountains of central Italy, the Samnites. Along the coasts, prosperous Greek cities. In the plains, the Latins, some allies, some rivals. Italy was not empty land waiting to be ruled. It was crowded, and Rome would have to earn every mile. The Latin War breaking old equals. At first, Rome's conflicts were close to home. The Latin cities, once Rome's equals in a loose alliance, began to resist Roman dominance. They feared becoming subjects instead of partners. The tension turned into war. The struggle was brief but decisive. When Rome won, it did not destroy the Latin cities. Instead, it dissolved their league and restructured the relationship. Each city would now be bound directly to Rome, not to each other. It was a quiet but brilliant strategy. Divide alliances, centralize loyalty, offer partial citizenship to some. Rome was learning that power did not require annihilation. It required structure. The Samnite Wars learning to endure. But the true test lay in the mountains. The Samnites were fierce highland warriors who knew the terrain intimately. Their lands were rugged, steep, and narrow, the opposite of Rome's open plains. For decades, Rome and the Samnites clashed in 3 long wars. There were victories. There were humiliations. At a place called the Caudine Forks, Roman legions were trapped in a narrow pass. Surrounded and unable to fight, they were forced to surrender. The defeated soldiers were made to walk beneath a wooden yoke, a symbol of submission. The shame was immense. But Rome did not collapse under humiliation. Studied it. The army adapted. Instead of rigid formations suited for flat land, the Romans developed the manipular system, smaller, flexible units that could maneuver independently. Soldiers trained harder. Discipline tightened. Rome did not always win immediately. It endured, and endurance became its greatest weapon. Roads and colonies building for the future. As the wars dragged on, Rome began to build something new, not just armies but infrastructure. Roads were carved across hills and valleys. Straight, durable, engineered to last. One of the earliest, the Via Appia, stretched southward like a stone spine connecting Rome to distant regions. Roads meant speed. Speed meant control. Where legions marched, settlements followed. Rome planted colonies in conquered territory, small communities of Roman citizens who acted as anchors of loyalty. These colonies spread Roman language, law, and custom outward like ripples in water. Conquest was no longer temporary. It became permanent. Pyrrhus and the elephants. In southern Italy, the Greek city of Tarentum grew alarmed at Rome's expansion. They sought help from a powerful king across the sea. His name was Pyrrhus of Epirus. He arrived with something Rome had never seen before: war elephants. At the first battles, the elephants caused chaos. Horses panicked. Roman lines wavered. Pyrrhus won victories that seemed decisive. But each victory cost him dearly. His soldiers fell in numbers he could not replace. His resources stretched thin. After one especially costly battle, he reportedly remarked that another such victory would ruin him. From this came a phrase still spoken today: a Pyrrhic victory, a win so costly it feels like defeat. Rome absorbed the lesson once more. It lost battles, but it could replace its soldiers, could draw from allied cities, could outlast foreign kings. Eventually, Pyrrhus withdrew. Southern Italy fell under Roman control. Patchwork empire within Italy. By the early 3rd century BCE, Rome dominated the entire Italian peninsula. But it ruled in a way unlike most conquerors. Some cities were granted full Roman citizenship. Others received limited rights, the ability to trade and marry Romans, but not vote in Roman assemblies. Still others were allies, bound by treaty to provide soldiers but maintain local governance. This uneven system was intentional. Rome created layers of inclusion. Communities had incentives to remain loyal. They gained protection and opportunity under Roman authority. Rome's power did not rest only on force. It rested on belonging, a new identity. As Italy unified under Roman influence, something subtle changed. Romans began to think bigger. No longer simply citizens of a city-state, they became leaders of a peninsula. Legions marched farther from home. Soldiers returned with stories of distant landscapes. Wealth increased. Trade expanded. The Republic, once preoccupied with survival, now looked outward. And across the narrow waters of the Mediterranean, another power watched. A city of merchants and sailors. A rival shaped not by hills and legions, but by ships and sea routes. Its name was Carthage. The island of Sicily lay between them. Rich, strategic, tempting. Rome had mastered land. Now it would have to master the sea. The hills of Italy had forged discipline. The mountains had forged endurance. The roads had forged unity. But the next chapter would test Rome in a way it had never faced before. War would no longer be confined to valleys and passes. It would stretch across open water. Rest now. Italy is quiet beneath Roman control. But beyond the horizon, sails are gathering. Crescent Moon. Chapter 5, Fire Across the Sea. When Rome finished conquering Italy, it stood at the edge of water. The Mediterranean stretched wide and blue beneath the sun. Not yet a Roman lake, not yet controlled by its legions. Across that sea stood another power, older in trade, richer in ships, master of distant coasts. Its name was Carthage. Where Rome built roads, Carthage built fleets. Where Rome trained infantry, Carthage trained sailors. Its harbors were filled with merchant vessels and warships. Its influence reached from North Africa to Spain and across the islands of the Western Sea. For a time, Rome and Carthage tolerated one another. Their interests rarely collided. But between them lay Sicily, fertile, strategic, and impossible to ignore. And so, slowly, tension turned to conflict. The First Punic War, learning the sea. The spark came from a small city in Sicily, caught between rival factions. Appeals for help drew both Rome and Carthage into the struggle. Neither side expected a long war. Neither understood how deeply it would reshape the Mediterranean. Carthage held the advantage at sea. Its navy was experienced, its sailors trained from youth. Rome, by contrast, had little naval tradition. But Rome had something else: adaptability. According to tradition, the Romans captured a Carthaginian ship and used it as a model. They built fleets quickly, rough, inexperienced, but numerous. And then they invented something clever: a boarding bridge called the corvus, a wooden ramp with a spike at its end. In naval battle, Roman ships would latch onto enemy vessels, turning sea combat into infantry combat. The sea became another battlefield of land tactics. For more than 20 years, the war dragged on. Fleets were built and lost to storms. Armies clashed across Sicily. Resources drained on both sides. But Rome endured. In 241 BCE, after a decisive naval victory near the Aegates Islands, Carthage sued for peace. Sicily became Rome's first overseas province. For the first time, Rome ruled land beyond Italy. The Republic had crossed the water. A dangerous peace. Carthage paid heavy reparations. But it did not disappear. To recover, it turned toward Spain, establishing new territories and exploiting rich silver mines. Among the leaders who expanded Carthaginian power, there was a family whose name would become legendary: the Barcids. And among them, a young boy who grew up listening to stories of Rome. His name was Hannibal. Hannibal's oath. Tradition tells that as a child, Hannibal swore eternal hostility toward Rome. Whether the oath happened exactly as told does not matter. What matters is that he kept it. In 218 BCE, war ignited again, the Second Punic War. But this time, Carthage did not wait for Rome to cross the sea. Hannibal crossed it first. He marched from Spain through southern Gaul and toward the Alps, a barrier Rome believed impassable for an invading army. And yet, slowly, painfully, Hannibal led his soldiers across snow and ice. With them came war elephants. The crossing cost thousands of lives. Men froze. Animals fell into ravines. Supplies dwindled. But when Hannibal descended into Italy, he carried with him surprise and fury. The shadow over Rome. The battles that followed shook the Republic to its core. At the Trebia River, Roman forces were ambushed and defeated. At Lake Trasimene, a Roman army was trapped between water and hills, annihilated in mist and confusion. Then came Cannae. On an open plain in 216 BCE, Hannibal used brilliant tactics to surround a much larger Roman force. The Roman army was encircled, compressed inward until escape was impossible. Tens of thousands fell. It was one of the worst defeats in Roman history. Across Italy, allied cities began to question Rome's strength. Panic rippled through the Republic. And yet, Rome did not surrender. The strategy of patience. Instead of confronting Hannibal directly again, Rome adopted a slower approach under a leader named Fabius Maximus. Avoid large battles. Harass supply lines. Wait, it was frustrating. It seemed cowardly to some, but it prevented further catastrophic losses. Hannibal remained in Italy for over a decade, undefeated in major battle, but unable to force Rome into submission. Meanwhile, Rome fought elsewhere. In Spain, Roman forces challenged Carthaginian strongholds. Among the commanders rising there was Publius Cornelius Scipio, young, ambitious, patient. He understood something essential. To defeat Hannibal, Rome must strike Carthage itself. The Battle of Zama. In 202 BCE, Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, invaded North Africa. Hannibal was recalled from Italy to defend his homeland. At the Battle of Zama, the two generals finally faced one another. This time, Roman preparation met Carthaginian brilliance. Hannibal's elephants were neutralized. His troops, weary from years of war, could not withstand the disciplined Roman legions. Carthage was defeated. Peace terms were harsh. Carthage lost its fleet. It surrendered territory. It became subordinate. Rome emerged dominant in the Western Mediterranean. The final destruction. Yet peace remained fragile. Decades later, suspicion grew once more. Some Roman leaders argued that as long as Carthage existed, Rome could never feel secure. In 149 BCE, war came again, the Third Punic War. This time, there was no drawn-out struggle across continents. Rome besieged Carthage directly. For 3 years, the city resisted. Hunger spread. Walls crumbled. In 146 BCE, Roman forces entered the city. Carthage was destroyed. Its buildings burned. Its people enslaved or killed. Its territory absorbed. The rival that had once matched Rome across the sea was gone. A new Mediterranean. After Carthage's fall, Rome stood unchallenged in the western Mediterranean. The sea that had once divided rivals now connected Roman provinces. Grain flowed from Sicily and North Africa. Silver came from Spain. Trade routes expanded. But victory brought new complications. Wealth flooded into Rome. Slaves arrived in vast numbers. Generals returned with glory and ambition. The Republic had survived its greatest external threat. But in surviving, it had grown larger than ever before. And size brings strain. The Mediterranean was quiet. But Rome itself was beginning to change. Rest now. The sails have fallen. The sea is calm. But within the Republic, something new is stirring. Crescent Moon. Chapter 6: Wealth, Reform, and the Breaking of the Republic. Part 1. 800 words. Rome had conquered the sea. Its ships moved across the Mediterranean without fear. Its legions had defeated Carthage, humbled Greece, and subdued the tribes of Spain. Silver flowed into its treasury. Grain fed its swelling population. Slave markets filled with captives from distant lands. Outwardly, the Republic had never looked stronger. But inside its borders, something subtle and dangerous had begun to change. Victory had altered Rome's balance. For generations, the Roman Republic had been built upon a simple social structure. Citizen farmers who tilled their land in peace and fought in times of war. Military service was temporary. A Roman soldier returned home to his fields once the campaign ended. Land ownership meant independence. Independence meant civic participation. The Republic worked because its citizens were invested, literally, in its survival. But the wars against Carthage had lasted years. Campaigns in Spain and Greece stretched even longer. Soldiers were now stationed far from home for extended periods. When they finally returned, many found their farms ruined, debts accumulated, and families struggling. Meanwhile, a new class of Roman aristocrats was growing unimaginably wealthy. They had purchased large estates across Italy. These estates, known as latifundia, were not worked by citizen farmers. They were worked by slaves captured in war. Tens of thousands of them. Slave labor was cheaper, tireless, replaceable. The small farmer could not compete. Gradually, the backbone of the Republic began to erode. Men who had once owned land sold it under pressure. They migrated to the city of Rome in search of work. But the city was already crowded. Jobs were scarce. Housing was cramped. Frustration grew. The Republic had conquered the world. But it was losing its middle class. The Forum Romanum, once a place of measured debate and civic pride, had become louder, angrier. Politics was no longer simply a contest of ideas. It was a struggle over survival. Into this rising tension stepped a young aristocrat named Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus. He was not a radical by birth. His family was noble, his lineage respectable. But he had seen something troubling during his service in Spain. Vast stretches of Italian countryside lay empty of citizen farmers. Instead, enormous estates were worked by slaves in chains. He understood the danger. If Rome continued this way, it would have land without citizens, wealth without loyalty, power without stability. In 133 BCE, Tiberius was elected tribune of the plebs, an office created long ago to protect common citizens from aristocratic abuse. He proposed a reform. Public land that had been illegally occupied by wealthy elites would be redistributed to landless Roman citizens. Not confiscated entirely, not seized violently, but legally reclaimed and fairly reassigned. It was, in theory, modest, but it threatened enormous interests. The Senate resisted immediately. Landowners saw profit slipping away. Political rivals accused him of ambition. They whispered that he sought popularity at the cost of tradition. Tiberius bypassed the Senate and brought his proposal directly to the popular assembly. The law passed, but something unprecedented followed. When Tiberius sought re-election as tribune, claiming he needed another term to complete the reforms, many senators panicked. No tribune had ever sought consecutive office. To them, it smelled of monarchy. On a tense summer day, violence erupted in the streets. Senators and their supporters armed themselves with clubs and broken furniture. They stormed the assembly. Tiberius Gracchus was beaten to death. His body was thrown into the Tiber River without ceremony. It was the first time in centuries that political blood had been spilled openly in Rome. The Republic did not collapse that day, but a boundary had been crossed. Violence had entered politics. 10 years later, his younger brother Gaius Gracchus would continue the fight. Where Tiberius had been measured, Gaius was fiery. He proposed not only land reform but grain subsidies for the poor, infrastructure projects to create employment, and even the extension of citizenship to Rome's Italian allies, men who fought in Roman legions but lacked political rights. His popularity surged. Crowds gathered to hear him speak. For a moment, it seemed possible that Rome might reform itself peacefully. But the Senate had learned from the first confrontation. Rather than attack immediately, they worked to divide his supporters. They funded rival tribunes. They spread rumors. They waited for unrest. When violence broke out between factions, the Senate issued what became known as the Final Decree, an emergency authorization granting magistrates broad power to protect the state. Gaius fled. Surrounded on a hill outside the city, he ordered a trusted slave to take his life rather than be captured. Thousands of his followers were executed afterward. The Republic had survived reform again, but at a terrible cost. What had once been sacred, the peaceful transfer of office, the sanctity of political life, was no longer untouchable. Ambition sharpened, fear deepened, and in the growing instability, a new kind of leader emerged. Not a reformer, not a philosopher, but a soldier. His name was Gaius Marius. He was not born into Rome's highest aristocracy. He rose through military achievement. He won victories in North Africa. He defended Rome against invading tribes from the north. He was celebrated, and he made a decision that would transform Rome forever. To solve manpower shortages, Marius removed the property requirement for military service. The poorest citizens could now enlist. The state would provide equipment. At first glance, it seemed progressive, but it altered the army's loyalty. These soldiers had no land to return to. Their future depended on military pay and promises of land grants after service. Their loyalty shifted from the Senate to their general. For the first time, Rome possessed professional armies devoted not primarily to the Republic, but to the man who commanded them. The balance of power shifted quietly. The Senate still debated. The assemblies still voted. But the legions listened to their generals. And somewhere beyond the horizon, future conflict gathered. Chapter 7: The Fall of the Republic. The Republic did not collapse in a single night. It did not fall to fire, nor to foreign invasion, nor to a crowned tyrant seizing the throne. It unraveled slowly, like a rope stretched too tightly for too long. By the middle of the 1st century BCE, Rome was powerful beyond imagination. Its armies dominated the Mediterranean. Its merchants traded from Spain to Syria. Its laws shaped half the known world. Yet inside the city itself, tension pulsed like a hidden fault beneath stone. The Senate argued. The poor demanded reform. The army followed its generals more faithfully than it followed the state. And in this unstable atmosphere, one man rose with calm ambition. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar, a name older than power. Caesar was not born into poverty, nor was he born into unmatched greatness. His family, the Julii, claimed descent from Venus through Aeneas, a mythological lineage that carried prestige but little immediate political strength. He grew up during violence. He watched the dictatorship of Lucius Cornelius Sulla tear Rome apart. He saw lists of enemies posted in public squares. He understood early that Roman politics was no longer guided by tradition alone, it was guided by force. Rather than retreat, Caesar adapted. He cultivated charm. He mastered rhetoric. He built relationships with both elites and common citizens. He understood that Rome no longer rewarded modesty. It rewarded visibility, the alliance of ambition. By 60 BCE, Rome was locked in political deadlock. Powerful men blocked one another's reforms. Personal rivalries paralyzed governance. Caesar saw opportunity. He formed an informal partnership with two men who dominated Roman life. Pompey the Great, conqueror of the East, adored by soldiers. Marcus Licinius Crassus, immensely wealthy and politically influential. Together, they formed what later historians would call the First Triumvirate. It was not a legal office. It was an agreement. Each would support the other's ambitions. Through this alliance, Caesar secured the consulship in 59 BCE and then, more importantly, a long military command in Gaul. And Gaul would change everything. The conquest of Gaul. Gaul was vast, tribal, and resistant to Roman authority. For nearly a decade, Caesar waged campaigns across its forests and rivers. He defeated massive tribal coalitions. He built bridges across the Rhine to intimidate Germanic tribes. He crossed the English Channel to Britain not to conquer fully, but to demonstrate reach. And with each victory, his legend grew. More importantly, his army grew fiercely loyal. They fought beside him in harsh winters and brutal sieges. They trusted his judgment. They believed in his leadership. He shared hardships with them. He rewarded them. And he made sure Rome heard of their triumphs through detailed written accounts that portrayed him as defender, not aggressor. Back in Rome, senators began to worry. Fear in the Senate. Crassus died during a failed campaign in the East. The triumvirate fractured. Pompey drifted closer to the Senate and became its champion. The political elite feared Caesar's popularity and military power. They demanded he surrender his command and return to Rome as a private citizen. Without his army, Caesar knew what awaited him if he obeyed. Prosecution, humiliation, perhaps exile. He stood at the edge of a small river in northern Italy, the Rubicon. Crossing it with an army would be illegal. It would be war against Rome itself. In 49 BCE, Caesar crossed. Civil war. The Republic fractured completely. Pompey fled to Greece to raise forces. Caesar pursued with speed and precision. At the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Caesar's smaller army defeated Pompey's larger one through superior discipline and tactical brilliance. Pompey escaped to Egypt, only to be murdered upon arrival. When Caesar reached Egypt and was presented with Pompey's severed head, he reportedly wept. The civil war continued briefly, but resistance faded. One by one, his opponents fell. By 46 BCE, Caesar stood unrivaled. The shape of monarchy. Caesar did not call himself king, but the changes were undeniable. He was appointed dictator for 10 years, then dictator for life. He expanded the Senate, filling it with loyal supporters. He reorganized provincial administration. He introduced a new calendar, the Julian calendar, aligning Roman time with solar precision. His statue was placed among those of kings. His image appeared on coins. He wore purple robes once reserved for monarchy. The word rex, king, was never spoken openly, but it hovered in the air. To many senators, the Republic felt finished. The Ides of March. On March 15, 44 BCE, Caesar entered the Senate chamber. A group of senators, including Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, surrounded him. They believed they were defending liberty. They struck repeatedly. Caesar fell beneath their blades. He died not in battle, but in the heart of the republic he had reshaped. The conspirators expected gratitude. Instead, Rome was stunned. The people mourned. The army did not celebrate. The assassins had removed the man, but not the system that created him. A republic already gone. Caesar's death did not restore old traditions. It unleashed new chaos. Power did not return to shared governance. It drifted toward whoever could command loyalty. And quietly, almost unnoticed, a young man stepped forward. His name was Octavian. He was patient. He was calculating. And he understood what the conspirators did not. The Republic was not going to be revived. It was going to be replaced. Rest now. The torches in the Forum burn low. The Senate sits uneasy. The legions wait for direction. And Rome stands at the edge of transformation. No longer a republic of competing voices, but an empire about to be born, and the birth of empire. Crescent moon. When Julius Caesar fell beneath the knives of senators, Rome did not awaken renewed. Fractured. The conspirators had imagined that by removing one man, they could restore the republic. But they misunderstood the moment. The republic had already changed. It had been reshaped by decades of civil war, inequality, and ambition. Power no longer lived comfortably in shared offices. It waited for someone strong enough to hold it alone. And that someone would not be Caesar's assassins. It would be his heir, the unexpected successor. Gaius Octavius was only 18 when he learned he had been adopted in Caesar's will. He was not a seasoned general. He was not widely known. But he possessed something rare in Roman politics: patience. He returned to Italy quietly, gathering allies, presenting himself not as a rival to the Senate, but as the rightful son of Caesar. He took the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. Soon he would shorten it, but first he needed legitimacy. Rome divided again. To avenge Caesar and stabilize the state, Octavian aligned himself with two powerful figures: Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, a senior statesman. Together they formed the Second Triumvirate, officially sanctioned with extraordinary powers. Their first act was not reconciliation. It was elimination. They published proscriptions, lists of enemies to be executed and whose property would be confiscated. Among the victims was Cicero, once the great voice of republican virtue. Blood flowed again through Rome's streets. Then came war. The assassins of Caesar Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus were defeated at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE. Both took their own lives. The Republic's last defenders were gone. A fractured alliance. With common enemies eliminated, unity faded. Lepidus was gradually pushed aside. Power concentrated between Octavian in the west and Mark Antony in the east. Antony had formed a political and personal alliance with Cleopatra. Together they ruled Egypt with wealth and ambition. In Rome, Octavian carefully shaped his image. He portrayed himself as the guardian of tradition, the defender of Roman values against Eastern decadence. Propaganda spread. Coins were minted. Speeches were crafted. What followed was inevitable: the battle for the world. In 31 BCE, the rival forces met at the Battle of Actium, a naval confrontation off the coast of Greece. Octavian's fleet, commanded by the skilled general Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, defeated Antony and Cleopatra. The defeated pair fled to Egypt. Within a year, both were dead. Octavian stood alone, but he did not declare himself king. He knew better. The subtle revolution. Rome despised kingship. The memory of the last monarch had lingered for centuries. So Octavian chose a different path. In 27 BCE, he publicly restored power to the Senate. In response, the Senate granted him the title Augustus. It meant the revered one. He accepted another title quietly: Princeps, first citizen. Outwardly, the republic still existed. Consuls were elected. The Senate met. Magistrates held office. But real authority now rested in one man. Augustus controlled the army. He oversaw key provinces. He directed finances. The republic had not fallen in a single blow. It had been absorbed. The Pax Romana begins. Under Augustus, Rome entered a period later known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For decades, the Mediterranean stabilized. Borders were secured. Trade expanded. Roads connected provinces from Hispania to Syria. Augustus reorganized the military into a professional standing army loyal to the state rather than individual generals. He created the Praetorian Guard, elite soldiers assigned to protect the emperor. He reformed taxation. He supported marriage laws designed to reinforce traditional Roman values. He famously claimed, I found Rome a city of brick, and left it a city of marble. Temples rose, forums expanded. The city gleamed, power without a crown. Augustus never called himself king. He avoided obvious symbols of monarchy. Yet his authority was absolute. He controlled legislation indirectly. He commanded the legions. He determined succession. When he died in 14 CE, the Senate declared him a god. Temples were built in his honor. The Roman Empire, though never officially named as such, had begun. A new era. The transformation was profound. Rome had moved from shared leadership to singular authority, citizen soldiers to professional legions, reluctant expansion to structured empire. And remarkably, most citizens welcomed it. After decades of civil war, stability felt like relief. Bread was distributed. Games were held. The empire prospered. The price was subtle. Political participation became symbolic. But peace endured. As night settles over marble rooftops and distant provinces glow under Roman torches, a new pattern has been set. The age of emperors has begun. And though many rulers will follow, some wise, some cruel, the system Augustus built will shape the world for centuries. Rest now. The legions stand guard. The Senate whispers carefully. And one man, styled as first citizen, holds the weight of the known world in quiet hands. Crescent Moon. Chapter 9, Emperors of Marble and Shadow. When Augustus died in 14 CE, Rome did not tremble. That was his greatest achievement. For the first time in generations, power passed from one ruler to another without civil war. The machinery he had built, careful, controlled, deliberate, continued to turn. But beneath the smooth marble surface, something delicate remained unresolved. Rome was now an empire, yet it had no clear rule for choosing emperors. It relied not on law, but on succession through family, adoption, and the quiet approval of the army. The age of emperors had begun, and with it came brilliance and darkness. Tiberius, the reluctant ruler. Augustus' chosen successor was his stepson, Tiberius. He was experienced, intelligent, and disciplined, a skilled general who had secured the empire's borders. But he lacked Augustus' warmth. Tiberius did not seek adoration. He preferred order. Under his reign, the empire remained stable. Taxes were managed carefully. The provinces were governed efficiently. The army stayed loyal. Yet in Rome itself, suspicion grew. Tiberius trusted few. He relied heavily on the Praetorian Guard, especially its ambitious commander Sejanus. Political trials increased. Accusations of treason became common. Eventually, Tiberius withdrew from Rome entirely, retreating to the island of Capri. From there, he ruled at a distance. The Senate obeyed. The empire endured. But fear lingered in the capital. Caligula, when power breaks the mind. When Tiberius died in 37 CE, the people welcomed his successor with relief. His name was Gaius, but history remembers him as Caligula. He was young, charismatic, and the son of the beloved General Germanicus. At first, his rule seemed promising. He freed prisoners. He held public games. He granted bonuses to soldiers. Then something changed. Whether illness or psychological strain, his behavior grew erratic. He declared himself divine. He demanded worship. He humiliated senators publicly and spent enormous sums on personal extravagance. Stories later exaggerated his cruelty, but even careful accounts agree that his rule became unstable. After 4 turbulent years, members of his own guard assassinated him. The empire had survived, but barely. Claudius, the scholar emperor. In the chaos following Caligula's death, the Praetorian Guard discovered an unlikely figure hiding behind a curtain in the palace. His name was Claudius. He was older, physically awkward, often underestimated due to a speech impediment and nervous manner. Many believed him weak. They were wrong. Claudius proved methodical and intelligent. He expanded the bureaucracy, professionalized administration, and improved the legal system. Most significantly, he launched the conquest of Britannia, extending Rome's reach across the Channel. Under Claudius, The empire strengthened quietly, but palace intrigue remained constant. His final marriage to Agrippina the Younger would shape Rome's future. Nero, fire and performance. In 54 CE, Claudius died. His adopted son ascended the throne. Nero. Young, artistic, and theatrical, Nero initially ruled under the guidance of wise advisors like Seneca. For a time, governance remained steady. But Nero longed not to administer, but to perform. He sang publicly. He raced chariots. He viewed Rome as a stage. In 64 CE, a massive fire consumed much of the city. While the true cause remains debated, Nero's response damaged his reputation. He rebuilt lavishly, including a grand palace complex. He blamed the fire on Christians, initiating brutal persecutions. Over time, paranoia deepened. He executed rivals. He killed his mother. He silenced critics. Eventually, rebellions erupted in the provinces. The Senate declared him a public enemy. Abandoned and alone, Nero took his own life in 68 CE. The Julio-Claudian dynasty ended. The year of 4 emperors. Nero's death unleashed chaos. In 69 CE, 4 men claimed the throne in rapid succession. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally, Vespasian. Each was backed by legions. Each relied on military loyalty. The empire's fate now clearly depended not on senatorial debate, but on the will of soldiers. Vespasian emerged victorious. The Flavian Restoration. Vespasian was practical, disciplined, and experienced. He restored financial order and rebuilt stability after Nero's extravagance. Under his dynasty, Rome recovered. The Colosseum began construction, a massive amphitheater symbolizing imperial strength. His son Titus reigned briefly, remembered for his steady response to disasters like the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Domitian followed, capable but increasingly autocratic. Though assassinated, the empire itself remained intact. Stability and structure. Despite instability at the top, something remarkable endured. The imperial system worked. Governors administered provinces. Roads connected distant cities. Trade flowed across continents. Rome had transformed from a republic governed by rotating magistrates into a centralized imperial structure that could survive even unstable rulers. The empire no longer depended on one perfect man. It depended on structure. And structure, for now, held. As night falls across marble temples and distant provinces glow under torchlight, Rome continues. Emperors rise. Emperors fall. But the machine turns. The legions stand watch on distant frontiers. The Senate still gathers, though now more in ceremony than power. And the world beneath Roman rule experiences something unprecedented. Relative peace under absolute authority. But golden ages do not last forever. And the next test would not come from palace intrigue. It would come from beyond the borders. Rest now. The torches flicker. The empire breathes. And in distant forests, new forces begin to stir. Crescent Moon. Chapter 10. The High Point of Rome. By the late 1st century CE, Rome had survived assassination, madness, civil war, and uncertainty. And yet, it stood stronger than ever. Its borders stretched from the misty hills of Britannia to the burning deserts of Arabia, from the Atlantic Ocean to the rivers of Mesopotamia. Roads tied the empire together like veins carrying lifeblood. Ships crossed the Mediterranean daily, heavy with grain, wine, marble, spices, and silk. The empire had matured, and now it would enter its golden age, the era of the good emperors. In 96 CE, after the assassination of Domitian, the Senate chose a respected elder statesman as emperor, Nerva. He ruled briefly but wisely. Most importantly, he adopted a capable military leader as his successor rather than choosing based on bloodline. That decision reshaped the empire. His adopted son was Trajan. Under Trajan, Rome reached its greatest territorial extent. Trajan, conqueror and builder. Trajan was a soldier emperor. Disciplined, practical, admired by the army. He launched successful campaigns against Dacia, modern Romania, bringing immense wealth into Rome. Gold from Dacian mines strengthened imperial finances. He then turned east, campaigning against Parthia and briefly expanding Roman territory into Mesopotamia. At its peak under Trajan, the Roman Empire was the largest it would ever be. But conquest was only part of his legacy. In Rome, Trajan commissioned grand projects, a massive forum complex, markets built into hillsides, aqueduct expansions, public baths. The empire did not just expand, it flourished. Hadrian, the emperor who drew lines, Trajan's successor, his adopted son, Hadrian, made a different choice. He did not seek endless expansion. He believed borders should be secure, not constantly pushed. Hadrian traveled more than any emperor before him, visiting nearly every province. He inspected defenses personally, listened to local concerns, and strengthened frontier lines. In Britannia, he ordered the construction of a massive stone barrier, Hadrian's Wall. Stretching across northern England, it symbolized a new philosophy, consolidation over conquest. Under Hadrian, the empire stabilized. Antoninus Pius, the quiet reign. Hadrian was followed by Antoninus Pius. His reign was remarkably peaceful. There were few major wars. The treasury remained healthy. Laws were refined, and fairness in administration improved. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in calm continuity. Rome during these years felt secure. Trade thrived. Cities expanded. Provincial elites integrated more fully into Roman identity. The empire was no longer just Italy ruling others. It was a network of shared citizenship. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor. The final ruler of this golden stretch was Marcus Aurelius. A scholar at heart, he studied Stoic philosophy. His private writings, later known as Meditations, reveal a man deeply concerned with duty, mortality, and virtue. Yet his reign was not peaceful. Plagues swept through the empire. Germanic tribes pressed against northern borders. War became constant. Marcus Aurelius spent much of his reign on campaign, writing philosophical reflections in military tents while legions defended the frontier. He ruled with seriousness and humility, but his decision to allow his son to succeed him, rather than adopting a proven leader, would alter the course of Rome. Commodus, a turning point. That son was Commodus. Unlike his father, Commodus preferred spectacle over statecraft. He styled himself as a gladiator, performing in arenas. He renamed Rome after himself. He neglected administration. While the empire did not collapse instantly, the careful balance maintained by the good emperors began to crack. In 192 CE, Commodus was assassinated. Another civil war followed. The Golden Age had ended. Life at Rome's peak. At its height, Rome was a marvel. Over 60 million people lived within its borders. Roads stretched over 400,000 kilometers. Aqueducts supplied fresh water to major cities. Legal systems ensured relative stability. Latin and Greek connected diverse cultures. Citizens in Spain, North Africa, Gaul, and Asia Minor identified as Roman. The Pax Romana, nearly 2 centuries of relative peace, allowed culture, architecture, and commerce to flourish. Colosseums rose in distant cities. Forums anchored urban life. Bathhouses became social centers. For many, Rome offered order in a chaotic world. The illusion of permanence. From the marble steps of temples, the empire looked eternal. Legions guarded frontiers. The Mediterranean was a Roman lake. Rebellion seemed distant, but beneath prosperity, slow changes were unfolding. Economic strain, overextended borders, reliance on constant military strength, political succession still uncertain. Empires do not fall in a moment, they erode. But in this chapter, in this quiet golden light, Rome stands at its highest point. Confident, organized, radiant. Rest now. The roads are smooth beneath marching sandals. The markets hum softly. The empire breathes in steady rhythm. And though storms will come, tonight, Rome shines at its peak. Crescent Moon. Chapter 11. The Empire Under Strain. At its height, Rome seemed unshakable. Its borders were guarded. Its laws were respected. Its roads connected continents. But strength does not disappear in a single moment. It thins, it frays, it weakens slowly until one day what once felt permanent feels uncertain. After the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE, something subtle shifted. He had ruled through war and plague with discipline and philosophical calm. But his successor was not chosen by merit. It was his son, Commodus, and that choice would echo for generations. A throne inherited, not earned. Commodus grew up surrounded by luxury, protected from hardship, praised before proving himself. He did not share his father's restraint. He saw the empire not as responsibility but as stage. He fought as a gladiator in the arena, not as symbolic entertainment, but as personal performance. He renamed Rome after himself. He placed his image beside God's. While governance drifted, spectacle grew. Behind palace doors, officials competed for influence. Corruption flourished quietly. The Senate resented him. The army tolerated him. In 192 CE, he was assassinated in a palace conspiracy. Rome once again stood without clear direction. The year of 5 emperors. After Commodus' death, civil war returned. Several claimants rose and fell rapidly, backed by competing legions. The most powerful among them was Septimius Severus, a hardened general who understood one truth clearly: the empire now belonged to the army. Severus secured power by increasing soldiers' pay and privileging military loyalty over senatorial tradition. The balance had shifted. Where once the Senate guided Rome's policy, now the legions determined its ruler. Severus strengthened frontiers and ruled firmly. But he also left behind an important precedent. The throne could be taken, not inherited, if one controlled enough swords. The 3rd century crisis. After Severus and his dynasty faded, Rome entered one of its darkest eras. Between 235 and 284 CE, more than 20 emperors ruled, most for only months or a few years. Many were declared emperor by their troops. Many were murdered by the same troops. The empire fractured. In the west, a breakaway state formed in Gaul. In the east, the wealthy city of Palmyra rose under Queen Zenobia. In the north, Germanic tribes crossed the Rhine and Danube. In the east, the powerful Sassanid Empire pressed hard against Roman borders. Cities were sacked. Trade routes disrupted. Coinage debased as inflation surged. Plague returned. The population shrank. For the first time in centuries, Rome felt mortal. The walls rise. Amid chaos, strong soldier emperors attempted stabilization. One of the most capable was Aurelian. He reconquered breakaway territories, defeated Zenobia, and restored nominal unity. Understanding Rome's vulnerability, he constructed massive defensive walls around the city itself. The Aurelian Walls. A visible sign that even the capital required protection. It was a sobering moment. The empire was no longer expanding. It was defending. Diocletian and a new structure. By 284 CE, Rome was exhausted. Then rose a practical and disciplined ruler, Diocletian. He understood that the empire had grown too large for one man to manage effectively. So he divided authority. He created the Tetrarchy, a system of 4 rulers, 2 senior emperors, Augusti, 2 junior emperors, Caesars. The empire was split administratively between East and West. This was not collapse. It was adaptation. Diocletian strengthened borders, reorganized taxation, expanded bureaucracy, and made the emperor a more openly absolute figure, no longer first citizen, but divine ruler. He also launched the last great persecution of Christians, seeking unity through traditional religion. Yet despite severity, he stabilized the state. For the first time in decades, the empire felt structured again. Remarkably, Diocletian voluntarily retired in 305 CE, something no emperor had done before. But succession disputes quickly followed. The system worked. Human ambition did not. Constantine and a shift in soul. Out of civil war emerged another transformative figure, Constantine the Great. In 312 CE, before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine claimed to see a vision, a Christian symbol in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." He adopted the symbol for his troops. He won. Soon after, he issued the Edict of Milan granting tolerance to Christianity. The empire's spiritual direction shifted. He later founded a new capital in the east, Constantinople. Strategically placed between Europe and Asia, it would become the empire's new heart. Rome, once center of the world, slowly became symbolic rather than administrative. Two empires in one body. By the late 4th century, the division between East and West hardened. In 395 CE, after the death of Theodosius I, the empire was permanently split. Western Roman Empire ruled from Milan and later Ravenna. Eastern Roman Empire ruled from Constantinople. The East was wealthier, more urbanized, and better defended. The West was rural, economically weaker, and increasingly dependent on barbarian federate troops for defense. The unity of Rome, once absolute, was fading into dual identity. The slow crumbling. The empire did not fall in fire. It sagged. It negotiated with migrating tribes. It hired Germanic warriors as generals. It ceded land in exchange for peace. It survived invasions but lost confidence. When the Visigoths under Alaric I sacked Rome in 410 CE, shock rippled across the Mediterranean world. The Eternal City had been breached. Though not destroyed, its psychological invincibility was shattered. More tribes followed. The Vandals crossed into North Africa, cutting grain supplies. The Huns under Attila the Hun threatened both halves of the empire. The West grew fragile. The East endured. As the chapter closes, the Roman Empire still exists. Its banners still fly. Its emperors still sit upon gilded thrones. But the world around it is changing. New peoples are rising. New religions spreading. New kingdoms forming. Rome is no longer shaping the world alone. It is adapting or trying to. Rest now. The walls stand tall. The legions patrol weary frontiers. And the empire, though strained, still breathes in the quiet darkness. Crescent Moon. Chapter 12, The Dimming of the West. Empires rarely fall in a single crash. They fade. They thin like old fabric, thread by thread, until one day light passes through where strength once held firm. By the early 5th century, the Western Roman Empire still carried the weight of its ancient name. Its emperors wore purple. The senators debated in marble halls. Its bishops preached in Latin beneath vaulted ceilings. But the foundation had weakened. The strength that once carried legions across continents now struggled to defend Italy itself. A world on the move. Beyond Rome's borders, migration reshaped Europe. Tribes once held back by Roman power were now pushed forward by new forces from the east. The Huns, fierce horsemen from the Eurasian steppe, surged westward, displacing entire peoples. Among those displaced were the Goths. In 376 CE, large groups of Visigoths crossed the Danube seeking refuge inside Roman territory. They were not conquerors at first. They were refugees, but mistreatment, hunger, and corruption among Roman officials turned desperation into rebellion. In 378 CE, at the Battle of Adrianople, the Goths defeated a Roman army and killed Emperor Valens. It was one of the worst defeats in Roman history. The empire did not collapse, but it lost something essential: the certainty of military superiority. The sack of Rome. For decades, Rome negotiated with Gothic leaders, granting land in exchange for military service. But tensions persisted. In 410 CE, the Visigoth king, Alaric I, marched on Rome. For the first time in nearly 800 years, the city was captured by foreign forces. The sack lasted 3 days. The destruction was not absolute. Churches were spared, many citizens protected, but the psychological impact was immense. If Rome could be taken, what was eternal? The world felt unsteady. Even St. Augustine wrote in response, defending the idea that earthly cities, even Rome, were never meant to last forever. The shrinking empire. The Western Empire continued, but it contracted. Britannia was abandoned. Gaul fractured into local kingdoms. Spain shifted under Visigothic control. North Africa fell to the Vandals, cutting off vital grain supplies. In 455 CE, the Vandals returned to sack Rome again. The city endured, but it was no longer the commanding center of a vast world. It was becoming symbolic, more memory than power. Meanwhile, real authority increasingly rested in the hands of Germanic generals serving within the Roman system. Men who were Roman in title but not in origin. The last emperor. By 476 CE, the Western throne was fragile. The emperor was a boy, Romulus Augustulus. Even his name felt like an echo of the past, Romulus, the legendary founder, and Augustus, the first emperor. But he ruled nothing in truth. Real power belonged to a Germanic commander named Odoacer. When Roman troops demanded land and were refused, Odoacer marched on Ravenna. He deposed the young emperor. He did not execute him. He simply ended the office. The imperial regalia, crown, scepter, purple robe, were sent to Constantinople. There would be no new Western emperor. The year was 476 CE. Historians later marked it as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But for many who lived then, it felt less dramatic. Life continued. Farmers tilled soil. Churches rang bells. Markets traded goods. The empire had not exploded. It had dissolved. Why it fell? There was no single cause. Not one battle. Not one emperor. Not one invasion. Instead, political instability weakened governance. Economic strain drained resources. Military dependence shifted toward federate troops. Population decline from plague reduced manpower. Trade disruptions fractured economic networks. Internal power struggles consumed energy meant for defense. The empire had grown vast. Too vast for its old structures. It adapted repeatedly, but adaptation eventually became fragmentation. The East still stands. Yet Rome did not vanish entirely. In the East, the empire centered at Constantinople continued. The Eastern Roman Empire, later called the Byzantine Empire, would endure for nearly another 1,000 years. Preserved Roman law, Roman administration, Roman identity. The West had fallen. The East still breathed. The legacy. Even in collapse, Rome transformed the world. Its roads shaped trade routes for centuries. Its legal codes influenced European law. Its Latin language evolved into French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. Its concept of citizenship and governance influenced modern states. Its Christian church became the foundation of medieval Europe. Even those who conquered Rome adopted aspects of its system. The idea of Rome survived long after its political body faded. A quiet ending. If you had walked through Italy in the late 5th century, you would not have heard the sound of final collapse. You would have heard ox carts creaking along old Roman roads, monks copying Latin texts by candlelight, children playing beside crumbling forums. The empire did not die loudly. It dimmed, like a sunset that takes hours to fade until one day night has come. But night is not emptiness. From the remnants of Rome, new kingdoms would rise. New cultures would form. And in the East, the Roman name would continue for centuries more. Rest now. The banners are lowered. The Senate halls stand quiet. And the Western Roman Empire, once ruler of oceans and continents, becomes memory. Not gone, but transformed into story. And stories, unlike empires, do not fall. Crescent Moon. If you enjoyed this journey through the rise and fall of Rome, if the sound of marching legions and distant cathedral bells brought you peace, take just a moment. Gently tap the like button. It truly helps this channel grow. Subscribe if you'd like more quiet journeys through history. And most importantly, leave a comment below. Tell me, Mantelpiece Clock, what time is it where you're watching? Globe showing Europe, Africa, and what part of the world are you listening from? I love seeing how far these stories travel. From midnight in India, to early morning in Europe, to quiet evenings in America. Wherever you are, you're part of this shared moment in time. So let me know below. Now, close your eyes. Let history fade into the background. And I'll see you in the next story. Good night, Crescent Moon.